And we're back. Man, all about this beat. I really enjoy
It's a sick beat. I know I said
like
that
it.
last
So
time, but I'm going to say it
I,
again.
I realized I did not say that young man's name. His name is Andrew. Zach
Right.
hooked us up with Andrew, his roommate. So shout out to both of them for hooking us up with the beats. I think it's something I want to do. I want to do more of that. I want to be able to have more musical variety in the show. So we're going to do that.
Yeah, Andrew. Anybody else? You got beats? Send us.
Yeah.
And if we like them, we'll play them.
All right, man. So this is actually going to be episode number 1 of our new podcast, because we did 3 episodes of an unnamed podcast, and we had some folks submitting suggestions. There were some colorful suggestions. We had a few that were privately messaged to us that were very hurtful. Ben, I'm looking at you. That one was very hurtful, and I will not repeat it. He was basically just trying to upset me. So none of the other ones were selected. We came up with our own, and it's kind of an inside thing. So it's going to be called "Not Your Restaurant," episode number 1, hence the graphic. And there's a story behind the "Not Your Restaurant" portion. So for those of you in jiu-jitsu, if someone is a rest round, someone who's not particularly challenging for you to go and compete with. So, like for instance, you used to tease me about being everyone's rest round.
Well,
because
let me tell this story. Let me tell this story, and then you can give me your version. So you come in and, like, let's say on a Sunday, right? So you go hard for 3 rounds, or there's a line of people waiting to roll with you, and you're like, all right, man, I rolled 3 hard rounds. I need a rest round so I can recover for 6 minutes.
Yeah.
It's me out there rolling, but it's active recovery, right? So that's the whole idea behind this rest round. So I don't know how long ago it is. This is probably within the last year to 6 months. So I don't deal well with people who, like, tell me about awesome things they've done, right? Or things they're really excited about. And I'm like, all right, man, cool. Like, that's really cool. Especially if I know what's going on behind it. And in this case, I did. So George comes back, and he's been trying to come back for a while, right? And shout out to Professor George. He's going to be on our podcast coming up. So if you guys have questions that you want us to ask him, or you want questions for him, definitely hit us up with those, and we will ask him. He's going to be our first guest. But he's trying to come back from kind of this major surgery, right? And he's having a hard time finding where he needs to be. So almost like Goldilocks here, where he's trying to roll with Black Belt Dave, and it's not going well, right? Because that guy, he's a killer. And he's trying to roll with me, but I play a pressure game, so it's not going well, right? So he's rolling with, like, the girls and the teenagers, and he's like, man, I got to find somebody where they're not giving me a hard time, but at the same time where, I'm able to work technique and, I'm not killing them or anything. So shortly thereafter, you text me, and I think it was like a Sunday, I wasn't there, and you're like, hey, man, had a Supergate training day. Professor George rolled with me a bunch of rounds, and I thought they were really good rounds. And I'm laughing to myself. I'm like, oh, no, he doesn't know. Like, he's George's rest round. Like, George had to find some guy who wouldn't, like, tax him too much, but somewhere he could still get some training in. And so you're all happy about that. And I'm like, ah, man, sorry, bro, I got to wreck it for you. You're George's rest round. And you probably laughed about it, but then it kind of became this thing where you're like, nah, man, I'm not anybody's restaurant. Like, I'm not doing that. And almost turned into this mantra of, like, mental toughness and, yeah, man, just going in and really giving it your all during a round, whether, regardless of what you brought to that round, like, it's not going to be easy for you. I'm going to give you a hard time. So you better just pack a lunch for that. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's funny about it too, because and then when you and I talked about that, anytime George would ask me to roll, I was like, oh, I see. And we got to start talking a bunch of trash to each other, which was really funny.
we just had one a couple months ago where he rolls with Dave. It was me, you, Dave, and George, right? You took a picture of that. And he rolls with Dave, and he's like, nah, I'm good. And then he rolls with you, and everything's going well. And then he's supposed to come back to me, but it's just how the matchup works. He rolls with Dave again.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that was it. He's like, I can't do anymore. And I was like, what about me? And he's like, nah, I'm leaving. I'm out of here.
Like, no, I'm good.
But I had some really good rounds with Rob.
I take that as a compliment because I can roll technically and under control,
Yeah,
even
yeah,
even
yeah.
under
That's what it
dire
is.
circumstances.
Yeah. But coming back to it, what I really like about it again is just that like mental toughness piece, man. It's where, I'm not going to be a restaurant. Let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like especially like when I train other places where people don't know me, like one of the things I joke about a lot is like when you're 150 pounds and you have a purple belt, the purple belt really doesn't signify anything except for goon bait. It's like, hey, look at this. You want to beat the crap out of a purple belt today? Look, here I'm your guy. And when I go travel other places, there I people ask you to roll or whatever, and I can always tell that like you get this vibe from people if they're just like looking around, they're huffing and puffing, and they're like, all right, all right, that guy, yeah, skinny technical purple belt, yeah, I'll roll with that guy. And I always have this little thing in my back of my mind of like, man, you picked the wrong guy.
Right. Yeah.
It's like,
that's good.
Yeah, and it's like, all right, cool, let's go. And then especially if somebody's already huffing and puffing, like I know I'm going to try and take it to him right away, just to like just see that look of like, oh, okay, this guy's not playing around. Yeah, that's and it's not a malicious thing, it's a competitive thing. Like I want people to respect my jujitsu, and they're not going to respect just my physicality, right? Nobody's going to look at me and just go, oh yeah, this guy's going to be, aside from the tattoos and stuff, people are probably not going to give me a second look, but I want to have that mentality of like, no man, I don't care how big you are, I don't care who you are, like we're gonna train.
Right. Yeah, and then I think we were talking about that in the last podcast where afterwards you kind of want that like, oh yeah, man, I messed up. Like I shouldn't have came over here, but that was a good roll.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, or like especially if you surprise somebody with something, and they go, oh, that was cool. Like that's a little dopamine drip in the back of my little lizard brain of like, oh yeah, I got you.
Yeah. Man, I was going through my old Instagram. I save stuff and I save jiu-jitsu videos and different workouts and stuff. And I have this this file where I save like really good stuff, right? And so I'm going through and I got my headphones on and I just start laughing. And my wife hears me laugh and she goes, "What are you laughing at?" And I don't know if you can pull it up or anything, but maybe you can edit it in later. But it's that Marshawn Lynch interview where he asks him, he's like, "Yeah, what's your mental strategy when you go into a game?" And he's like, "Man, the first thing I do is whoever my guy is that lines up against me, I just run through his face over and over and over and over." And he says it probably 20 times. Yeah. He even like takes a pause and over and over and over again. And I mean, Marshawn Lynch is this character, right? So I'm laughing because I know what's happening. Yeah. And the guy's like, "Hey, Marshawn, do you think there's like a deeper metaphor there?" And he's like, "Yeah, run through a motherfucker's face, and then you don't have to worry about him no more." I'm like, yes, that is so awesome, right? Because absolutely, right? You see those guys in tournaments who do that, who come out super aggressive, right? Nicky Rod. Again, I was just listening to that podcast where that guy comes out. He's been training for 6 months, and sure, he has years of grappling experience, but he comes out and he's just aggressive. Like he's flexing on dudes, like just, staring at them, flexing them down. He sees arguably probably one of the greatest jiu-jitsu guys of all time in Cyborg. And he's like, what's this old guy going to do? And it's just that mentality. And he ran through that guy's face and ends up beating him. Not only at Abu Dhabi, but a few months later, they met up for a money match, a super fight, and he beats him again. And it's like, man, like how that had to be a huge hit to Cyborg. But all it really is just that mentality of like, I don't care who you are, I'm going to run through your face.
Right. Exactly.
I love it. All right. Shout out to Drew. I'm wearing my podcast shirt. He called me out on that. Even though we've only done 4 podcasts, apparently I can't wear the same shirt. I'm in quarantine. I'm in quarantine, bro. Okay. So plus I really like this shirt. So shout out to Drew. If Drew wants to buy me a shirt and send it to me, I'll wear it. Let's get into the questions, man. So we had some good questions. I love it when you guys send us questions because you come up with really good questions and we're more than happy to answer them. So we had 2 people ask us along the similar lines of questions. So we're just going to get into them here. So Rob, tell me why you started training, or what got you into jiu-jitsu.
Wow. So I've made a joke about this on one of the other podcasts that like everybody that starts jujitsu starts it for like 3 reasons. Or like say it's like the 3 most common reasons. One is like they like MMA.
Yeah.
2, they listen to Joe Rogan's podcast.
Right.
And 3 is they just want to work out and they just happen upon Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I was option 2. Like I started listening to Rogan's podcast. Like I think I started like my first one I think was like number 72, and he has like I don't know 14 or 1500 now. And so like I started like way back in the day when it was just like out of his house, and I was like, oh, I like Joe Rogan. I've seen his stand-up before, and he just talked about Jiu-Jitsu so much. And I was working in an office job, and I had a lot of time to listen to podcasts, and just how he talked about it, how interesting it sounded, and like the technical side of the game. Because I started watching things like, that was right around the time they started doing like Metamoris, like the first Metamorises, where they're doing like really high production value, really high level jujitsu, and getting to see that both gi and no gi. Because I always grew up watching boxing and MMA and pro wrestling and stuff like that. I was always just interested in it, but jujitsu was 100% through Rogan. It was just like him talking about it and just having other folks on it, how powerful it was just for changing people's lives. And like, it was super appealing for me being a smaller person, being, I think definitely on the weaker side physically. I don't have a lot of like, especially at the time, this would have been my first exposure. This would have been like 2011, something like that, I think is probably when I started listening to that podcast. And, it took me a good few years to be able to work up the courage to be able to go to a class where I was studying jujitsu. I was like reading books and like trying to work out enough to be like, okay, like, can I do like 5 push-ups? Because I'm going to need to do a push-up if I'm going to like go do a warm up or something like that. And I was starting at the absolute bare minimum because, how severe my arthritis was. Like I couldn't do, like, if you guys know what a technical stand-up is, I couldn't do that. Like I had to have a specific way that I would have to get up off the floor, like rolling up in order, because I couldn't put pressure on my hands because of my wrists, and I couldn't do basic things like that. Like I couldn't hold a gallon of milk. It's just holding out a gallon of milk. I had to like keep it really close to my body and hold it with both hands because I couldn't hold it out with one hand. Really, really minimal amount of physical activity I could do that wasn't extremely painful. And it took me a long time to be able to work up the confidence and the courage to be like, okay, like I'm going to go try a class. And this might be the only time I do this because I might just go in there and get absolutely worked, but I'm going to be really excited about it. And I came into a class in October of 2014, and it was a 6 p.m. class. It was you and Professor George, and you ran through the warm up, and Professor George was teaching most of the class, and like you were just there. And then you get at the time you were also coaching noons, and I remember like I would go do like the Monday night class, and then I'd go do the Tuesday noon class with like you and Dewey and Paul, and then I'd do the like Wednesday night class and then Thursday. And like first class, I was just hooked. I was just like eyes wide open, just like getting to see the techniques, getting to feel like, especially we were working on like escapes and just like feeling the weight of someone on top of you, and then say, okay, now put your arms in here, bridge, put your nose over here, and then like just doing a simple escape, and like being able to feel strong from a position where I was like, this is terrible, this is really bad, and then being able to feel strong enough to be able to move somebody over, just like a simple bridge. It was like really empowering for me, and I was like completely addicted like right away. It was like, it's like, the meme with Zach Galifianakis from the Hangover, where like all the math is like floating through his brains.
Yeah.
That was like me with jujitsu. It was like, oh my god, this is so cool. And just immediately was training as much as I could, and even just like other things that I was really interested in were kind of put to the side, where I was just like, no, I need to do jiu-jitsu as much as humanly possible and to learn it as fast as possible, because being bad at jiu-jitsu is really frustrating when you want to be really good.
Right.
It's like the first 6 months you're like, oh man, I think this is like the coolest thing, but I am so terrible at this, and I am just getting crushed every time I'm here. But I like tie my belt, and I'm gonna go to class and try not to be annoying and try not to get hurt. Like those are my goals. Like, try not to annoy anybody with all my questions, and it was usually you, and then don't get hurt. And for the most part, I've done pretty good on injury prevention. But that's it, man. That's how I got started, and just completely hooked.
Man, shout out to Joe Rogan, where probably one of, and I don't go out looking for these things. It's just when I see them, but probably one of the best black belt speeches I've ever seen. So if you guys hit up YouTube, when he got his 10th planet black belt, super cool black belt speech he did. It's weird to me. What is it about a delay in students come in? You talked about that, where, I did the same thing, but I was a distance. So I was in Grand Forks and I was studying, and I was so excited to get to Fargo. And then I got to Fargo, and I had it all planned out in my mind, probably a year in advance, where I'm coming to that class. But later on, and I was a coach at this time, and I was invested in getting new people to come into our jiu-jitsu school. But I was having some issues. And I think this would be a great podcast down the road. It's just kind of talking about injury prevention, especially for you who came in with some issues already. And then me and, both of us here, where, I started out where I wasn't doing anything other than jiu-jitsu, but then I started to catch up with me. So how we work through those different injuries. But as a student, I wanted to do yoga, right? And that's actually Anne, one of the people we talked about before.
Yeah.
Where she recommended this. I was telling her, I was like, man, I'm just beat up all the time, and I got all these injuries, and my hips are killing me. And she's like, you got to go do yoga. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to go do that soccer mom nonsense. I'm just not going to do it. And she's like, all right, whatever, it's your choice. But I just couldn't get past this thing. Right. And so she's like, seriously, like, why don't you come try it? Just try it once. Like, what are you going to lose? You're going to get a good workout out of it. It's in a hot room, and it's an hour of your time. And it took me probably a month to 6 weeks to actually go. But I wanted to go, where every day I would check the website. I would go on their Facebook and watch their videos. And I was like, yeah, man, I'm going to go to that. I'm totally going to go to that. But
it took you a month?
It took me a month to get in there, because I kept talking myself out of it. Like, no, it's just maybe not today's the best day. And then finally what changed it for me is like, man, what are you doing? Man, you expect people to come in jiu-jitsu all the time, and you're kind of being a little bitch about it. So just go to your class. And this is my message for all those people who are, like you, where, and I know like you have to go through it sometimes to experience it, but just come. You will not regret it. Absolutely. Because I went to that first class, and I've probably been doing yoga for, I don't know, 3-4 years now, but that class is still probably one of my top 5 classes of all time that I've ever done. And it probably, in hindsight, if I could go back and watch a video of it, probably wasn't that great of a class, but just the overall experience of it, it was like, man, yeah, I know that now I'm going to have to do this for the rest of my life, because just how I felt before, or like during and after, especially after, you just feel awesome. Right. And it's like, man, I don't regret that at all. In fact, that was like a Thursday. I took a noon class, and my wife and I and my son was actually in the wedding. We had a wedding that weekend, and I was trying to figure out how I could get to classes Friday, Saturday, and Sunday and still make it to the wedding. It didn't work out necessarily, but I was so obsessed at that point. But yeah, it's just, if you're a student and you kind of get into that, you're thinking about a common question we get all the time is, what kind of shape do I need to be in to start jiu-jitsu? And it's like, here's the deal, man. I tell this to people. We just had a guy in the other day, and this goes to this mental toughness, not your restaurant, is here's the deal. It's the best way to get in shape for jiu-jitsu, at least initially, is just to come do jiu-jitsu, right? It's going to suck, right? But I'll tell you this, rarely do I see a person who comes in who just like sails through everything, right? If we lined up all our students, I could probably, you've all been to one of my classes, right? The both of us, our student base now currently, probably 90% of them have come through our fundamentals classes, right? And I bet we could go down the line and say, hey, on your first day, you couldn't do a somersault. On your first day, you couldn't do a hip out. On your first day, I don't know how you got in the door, because the amount of coordination it takes to, open up the door and step inside, you didn't have it, right? Yeah. But look at where you are now, and a lot of those people who, I find that a lot where, people who come in who are naturally gifted at jiu-jitsu, they don't always stay. But the guys who really need jiu-jitsu, the ones who come in and you're like, man, I don't even know how you made it in the door. Like a year later, just because they came in that one time and they were consistent, some of our best students. It's crazy, you know?
Yeah. And those are the people that I think that you have. I think they're also awesome for our culture.
Absolutely.
Because there's certain people that when they come in, they don't have any of those other natural gifts, I think, for grappling. But what they have is like, there's I think just about all of them have very intellectually interested in just like the technical side of jiu-jitsu. Like there's some sort of curiosity about like how and why does that work? Like they have that.
Yeah.
And there's also this like grit. And I think that's the best way to describe it. Like I can think of several people where like Corey is a really good example of this. Like Corey's a quiet guy, but he's very sharp. Like you don't have to explain stuff to him multiple times. Like you just hear him like, okay, yep, got it. And he'll go and do it. But when you train with him, you can tell he has spirit. Like he has that grit where he's like, no, man, like, no, we're gonna roll. And some people don't naturally have that. And they don't develop that maybe ever. But I think the people that come in that are really that are successful, and they're successful for a long period of time, is they have that like the genuine curiosity, and then there's this deep rooted competitive grit, and it's not like a body style thing. It's not a personality thing. It's just a characteristic that you see. And there's people that come in like Daniela has it. She just has grit. She's like, she's going to come in and she's going to grind. And I think that those are the people that, me personally, if I'm like recruiting people, that's like one of the number one characteristics that I want to recruit is I want people with grit. Cause like I can't teach you attitude. I can teach you technique. I can teach you, I can teach you parts of the game, but I can't teach you that. You either have it or you have to develop it on your own. And otherwise it's not something anybody can really give to you, And I think that if you're listening to this and you're like, maybe you haven't gone to a jiu-jitsu class and you're like, well, I want to be able to, lift X amount of weight, or I want to be able to, run 5 miles or do this or do that. Like I can tell you, man, that stuff's not going to help. Like maybe it'll help you out of a situation, but I have yet to see any sort of replacement for training. And that's drilling, rolling. Like, I mean, you got me into the hot yoga thing and I love doing that too, but it's not training. And it's a different kind of tired. It's a different kind of stress when you're in the middle of a round and you're realizing you're in deep water. Like mentally, that's really challenging. And, I think if you're interested in doing it, you just have to come do it. Right. And if it's for you, you'll know right away, because I think you're just like, you come in, if you're hooked on it, okay, get in the boat. We're all hooked too. So
yeah, I agree with that. Where this fits in with the name of the podcast is, I think you have people who, what jiu-jitsu does a really good job of is separating. It doesn't catch everybody. The filter doesn't catch everybody. Right. But for the most part, it's going to catch those people who have already had that grit, or maybe have the discipline and they're willing to learn the grit, that mental toughness. But the people who just have that ability to commit to something and keep coming in, and they almost go through that gauntlet, that rite of passage, and they become that person where they're willing to persevere and kind of put up with it. And it's like, yeah, man, those are the people that I want to have a seat at the table, the jiu-jitsu table, our jiu-jitsu table, where, they've kind of been through that and they're hardened by that, first 6 months to a year experience, man. That's super cool. The only replacement I found really in my mind is not necessarily harder training, where I agree with you. There's no training that necessarily mimics it, but where you can go out and find this, hot yoga or something that's a mental thing, right? And so that's what it is for me. Is I wanted something where, sure, I could put on a YouTube video and stretch in my living room, but it's not the same thing. Where I want to work out of it, I want purpose behind it, and that's what I love about jiu-jitsu, is there's purpose behind it. It's not me doing endless reps in a gym. It's me learning how to defend myself, but also this game where I'm not trying to get murdered by this dude. I know it's pretend, you know,
yeah.
but I mean, there's also this level of kind of mutual respect, right? Where they don't have to let go when I tap, you know, but they do, right? But it's like, man, if you wouldn't have let go, I mean, I don't know, right? That could have been it, right?
Yeah, but there's that trust and that camaraderie of like, I think about this sometimes, or like, especially when like when we're training for pans, and when we've had like a rough room where it's like 8 people, they're all either upper belts or like serious athletes, and it's like you look around, you're like, man, this is a tough room, and I have this little thought to myself of like, there is almost no one within like a 500-mile radius that is doing something as physically and mentally demanding as what I'm doing right now.
Certainly not more. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there might be, it's like, yeah, there might be intense situations, you know, surgeons, you know, like people that have life and death stuff on the line. But when it comes to like just overly like physically and mentally challenging things, man, like it's a pretty minimal, because there's only so many places you can get that. And there's very few people that are going to willingly go and do that. And it's very comforting to like go, all right, well, you're here. Like, you're surviving it. Like, and when you come out on the other side, and, you know, especially if you have some sort of success, or if you just get through it and don't get hurt, and you're like, okay, that was good. I went through that. All right, that was good. All right. Like, I'm gonna go ice myself, but this is good.
Right.
Like, you know, I think that's part of that addicting nature of it too, is that like you find that progress through struggle. And I think that's where you get the most, I think you have the most enjoyment out of those kinds of things, because it doesn't come easy. You can't go and just buy it. You can buy all the DVDs you want, you can buy the fanciest gi you want. Doesn't, like, you got to get on the mats. Like that's one of the things that you used to say that all the time. Like, mats don't lie.
Yeah. Right.
Like, you're either on them, earning it every day, or you're not.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter who you are outside of the gym, right? You know, you could be the most successful person, but, you know, it's when we come in, it's just your jiu-jitsu against my jiu-jitsu, right?
Yep. Yeah, like I was listening to a podcast with Ashton Kutcher from That 70s Show, the actor, and he's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu now.
I mean, come on, really? You think he's really? Is that legit?
That was the whole point, is like, he trains with the Machados. He had a wrestling background. Dude is extremely intelligent. Like, he's like a tech investor now. Like, and I actually watched a video of him rolling with Craig Jones.
And how was that?
It was cool. I mean, he was moving around, and, you know, Craig's playing with him. He's not, you know, it's not a it's like Craig's not trying to submit him. Yeah, Craig's
world class.
Yeah, Craig's world class, and, you know, Craig's taking his back, and, you know, Ashton's trying to pass his guard and stuff like that. And it's like, you know, a guy like that, he doesn't have to, like, his life can be extremely comfortable. He has tens of millions of dollars. He has a beautiful family. Like, he doesn't have to struggle. But even that guy is like, and he was like, he's super shy about it. Like, he doesn't want people to know that he trains jiu-jitsu, and like videos always pop up about it because he's famous.
Right.
He's like, man, I'm just out there just trying to not suck at it like everybody else. He's like, and it's a thing that I need, and it's part of my life, and I would be doing it regardless of whatever else I have going on in my life. I'm like, yeah, man. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, you can have a comfortable life, but you choose not to. And that's why you're still growing as a person, and not just like plateauing or anything like that. I think it's so cool.
Man, that makes me think about David Goggins, right? You know, so you were talking about podcasts earlier, and I think, like, you know, I hear the Joe Rogan podcast, and I hear like the Jocko podcast, or those big ones. And, you know, for people who have never heard of David Goggins, man, I definitely give him a look up. And I think he's like the R-rated version of Jocko, you know, or maybe the double R, or whatever you want to call that. But he swears a lot. He's not for everybody, but he's like super intense. And one of the things that got me, I was listening to kind of his story about his life. And he's like, man, you know, what you need to do is you need to go out and get some friction in your life. Like, don't go and, you know, just have easy days. You know, find stuff that's going to challenge you, find stuff that's going to make you better, right? And like you said, the struggle, right? What is Ashton Kutcher? Where's he struggling? He's never struggling, but I think there's something hardwired in our DNA where, maybe not everybody, but I think most people, it's like they need some type of struggle in their life right? So they can kind of feel that, and then they can feel themselves coming through in the end, right? And there's something like rewarding about that, where, okay, that hard training session you were talking about, where, man, I didn't die. I
Yeah.
made it through. Like, I did way better than I thought I would with these really good guys. And even, you've certainly traveled more than I have, but I've been in those same rooms where you walk in, and, I've never had an experience at Fargo where there's multiple black belts in the room, right? One of the trips I took down to Denver, and I didn't realize this at the time, but this is just kind of a thing where if you're a black belt in some schools, you line up next to the instructor, right? So, for students who've been to the classes, your instructor stands out front. Everybody does the formal lineup, at least for most classes, and you bow in. Well, all black belts stand up with the instructor. I went down to one of these trainings, and there was probably 10 black belts lined up with the instructor. And I was like, man, there's more black belts here than are at some of the classes at my school, or some of the students at my classes at school, right? Because sometimes we only have 10 or less students, depending upon the day or the time of year, right? And so that was just crazy, where I was like, man, I don't know if I'm going to get through this. This is a lot. But then you do make it through it, and just being able to get through that struggle. And,
Yeah.
I can see why he does it. Absolutely. Because where else is he going to get that?
Right. Because it's like everything else is taken care of for you, but the one thing that you can't, it's definitely one of the things, like, you can't buy that. You have to earn it. And
right.
And if you're going to be out there and it's the equalizer, it's like,
Absolutely.
you can be physically gifted and all these, you can have all these accolades and you can have this, that, and the other thing. But at the end of the day, the whatever belt you are, all it's doing is keeping your jacket shut. That's it.
For real, right?
And what's the line? I forget, it says, like, the belt's just there to keep your jacket shut, but it doesn't cover your ass.
Right.
It's like,
man. Or only 2 inches of it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, man, it's, but it's also very motivating that, like, even if whatever level that you're at, whether you're just starting or like you've been training over a decade, you still got to come in and earn it.
Right. Yeah.
Or because otherwise you got all these, young bucks coming up, and people are going to be coming after you. And if you don't put in your time on the mat, then you're going to start slipping. And you start slipping, you're going to have some rough days. And, because the hyenas are always, they're always in the back. Like, they're circling, man. They're like, oh, here it comes.
Right. Man, I heard this analogy one time, and I love it. It's where being a jiu-jitsu instructor is a lot like raising snakes, where a lot of times, you raise these snakes, but they're going to bite you every once in a while, right? And so that's what it is where, especially now where we have kind of almost generations where, Professor George was a generation, and now we're kind of that next generation where we're coming up, and there's going to be a third generation on top of that. And every generation is going to be better than the one before it, So this next generation, who knows what kind of crazy stuff they're going to be getting into in this new school jiu-jitsu. And you're going to be like, man, I don't even know what you're trying to do to me here, but just all that cool stuff, right? So why did I start training? So my story is I was in Grand Forks, and I'd graduated college, and I was kind of working some different sales jobs. I worked in a bar a little bit. I worked at Best Buy. And I couldn't really find my foothold in the world, right? And so I was just struggling with where should I be. And so I was looking through the paper one day, and I saw this advertisement for the Fargo Police Department. I was like, man, that would be a pretty cool job. Why not? You're not sitting at a desk all day. You have a pension, you get these pay increases or whatever. So I started going through the hiring process for Fargo. And as I'm going through this, I had some weight to lose and all this other stuff, and getting ready, running around, doing the push-ups, the sit-ups to get into for your qualification test to get in. And I started thinking to myself, like, man, I've been in a few fights, nothing crazy, but I've been in a few fights, and I really have no idea what I'm doing. So I should probably learn how to fight. So if I ever encounter anybody on the job that knows how to fight, I at least know what I'm doing, right? And so that was kind of my entrance into it. And I was, of the three that you listed, I was an MMA guy. Man, I loved UFC. And, it's back in the day, and I'm sure, most people remember this, is it wasn't like it is now where it's just UFC all the time. back then it was like, man, maybe once every few months there was a UFC, and you knew all the UFC fighters. There wasn't 500 of them or 1,000 of them. There was, maybe 50 of them, and you knew all of them, and you had your guys. Like I remember just getting excited, and one of my managers at the time, this is back when I just graduated college, we used to just argue about BJ Penn versus GSP. And I was a BJ Penn guy, and he was a hardcore GSP guy, and we would just go at it for months, and then we'd put money down on the fight that was, supposed to be coming up a month later, right? Man, that's how I got into jiu-jitsu. Now, is that why I stuck around? No, I mean, the same thing as you is like, man, once I got in there and figured out like, oh, this is a big puzzle, and I like puzzles, like trying to figure that out, and it didn't hurt that I was pretty good at it. And so I was like, man, yeah, I really like this where I can come in, I can get a good workout, and I'm not focusing on, like when I go running, my shins hurt. And I'm like, oh man, this sucks. Like I can't get outside with my shins hurting. But I don't think about that when I'm rolling. I don't think about how my lungs are burning. I don't think about how my legs are burning. I'm thinking about, okay, I'm trying not to die right now. Or how am I trying to tap out this other person, and just getting in that headspace. And then working through again, coming back to it, circling back to it, is just that mental toughness piece I really like.
Yeah. So what sports did you play growing
up? So, typical kid growing up in the 90s, I probably did just about everything.
Okay.
I remember very distinctly, I went and asked my dad, he'd probably deny the story today, but I went and asked my dad if I could play football. And he's like, no, I'm not going to sign you up for football. Probably similar to a lot of the stuff that's going on now with the concussions and everything, where he played football and he's like, no, it's not worth it. And so I ended up playing a lot of soccer. And then I ended up swimming a lot, where it's one of those things where I got into it because my friends were doing it, and I think that was another just life skill, is my dad wanted me to be a swimmer. He was a big swimmer, a big scuba diver, and he wanted me to do the same thing. And I was pretty good at it. My friends were doing it, and so I just kept doing it, and I did that throughout high school and into college. So,
but you never did any wrestling or other grappling or anything like that?
Mm-mm. Yeah, I mean, a little bit of wrestling in elementary school. I think my dad took me to a judo class when I was in elementary school.
Got it.
But nothing where I could say nothing I would say for sure, yeah, I did a year or I did 2 years or anything like that.
Yeah. So with you starting, like you said, you had some lead time before your first class.
Right.
So because you were kind of like, that was as you were preparing the move, or like because you had the, you're going through the PD stuff. Like, was it as you were starting the PD, that's when you started your first classes, or was it like preparatory for it? How did that work?
So I would say that this was probably like a year before. I was like, man, I really like this UFC stuff. What's this ground stuff? That's cool. So I started researching jiu-jitsu. I don't know if guys remember, but I got the Eddie Bravo's first DVD set, Mastering the Rubber Guard, right? And he talked a lot about half guard. He actually I bought the book and the DVD set, and he says in there, one of the first lines is he says that a lot of white belts just inevitably end up in half guard. And so, we should probably learn how to play half guard, right? And so I took that as gospel, where to the point where I made that my reality, because whenever I roll with somebody, I would force myself into half guard. Be like, oh man, Eddie Bravo's right. We're always in half guard.
Yeah, right.
No, man, you made that happen. But still, it's where probably my biggest success, at least in that I can remember, is hitting an old school sweep, And I remember I was drilling with Professor George, and I hit an old school sweep on him, and he wasn't resisting or anything. It was just we were drilling back and forth, and he's like, "Oh, damn, you know that sweep?" I was like, "Yeah, I know that sweep." It's just something that made you feel cool, right? And so I would do the electric chair sweep, and then people would start to defend that, and then I'd hit an electric chair sweep, and I would come up on that, and that was kind of my beginning, but only because I had that DVD set before that I was watching. I mean, and how dumb is that? Where I wasn't going into any classes or anything, but I already had a DVD. I already bought a DVD. I already bought a book. There really wasn't anything in Grand Forks, but I had it all planned out. So I actually had to go through 4 months of training prior to getting on becoming an officer. And so my first day of the academy was Tuesday, May 19th, 2009. And that was actually my first class. It was a Tuesday night class. Professor George taught a fundamentals class. So I'll always remember that because it's linked. It's forever linked with my history, you know. You know, like you said, it's multiple links where I kind of started two things at the same time. All right, so another one of the questions was, what are my thoughts on jiu-jitsu for law enforcement? And so what I think about this is I don't necessarily, because we teach techniques, you know, I was on, it's technically still on, I guess, is I'm part of the defensive tactics team for my department. And what initially we would do a lot of techniques and stuff, but I try to shy away from that here recently, because what I think is the biggest thing is acclimation to violence, is where, you know, it's hard to say where I think something is better than nothing, but you think about like these weekend self-defense courses. Come in for 3 hours on a Saturday, we'll teach you everything you need to know about self-defense. If you think that you're going to learn everything you need to know about self-defense in 3 hours on a Saturday, that's terrible. That's wrong. Not that it's irresponsible of us. Like I said, I think it's a good introduction. There's a lot of good things you can share with people in that class and introduce them. But really, you know, I think Elliot said this one time, Elliot Marshall out of Denver, Easton's BJJ, you know, somebody asked him, they said, "Hey, do you do self-defense seminars?" He goes, "Yeah, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6." Well, that was his fundamentals. That was his fundamentals schedule at the time. But it's like, you know, how on point is that? And so really, again, going back to that, I think for self-defense or even law enforcement, it's not so much the techniques. The techniques help, but it's that acclimation to violence. You know, and you were talking about this a little bit, and I always think about that Fight Club movie quote where he said, you know, as soon as you get into Fight Club and you start fighting, the volume on everything else in your life gets turned down. And I think about that where I deal with people on a regular basis where they don't scare me. You know, it's because it's like, man, you know, like there's dudes like you at my gym that I roll with all the time, and you're not going to do anything to me that I haven't seen before, right? And I know what I can do, what I can handle. I know, you know, my boundaries because I've been there and I've been acclimated to that. And I think that's such a huge thing where a lot of times, you know, we'll get into situations where me and my partner were on a call, we're fighting with somebody and they kind of black out a little bit. Right. And so for people who don't understand that expression, it's where, you know, you probably had this happen to you at some point in your life, but you just kind of get into a physical situation. And then when people ask you to recall it later, you're like, I don't know. I don't know what happened. I just blacked out, you know, the lights went out and I just went on autopilot. And it's like, ooh, okay. That's really scary in law enforcement because you're responsible for all your actions. So you need to be able to say, you know, this is exactly what I did and why I did it, right? Instead of just blacking out.
Sure.
But this is my question for you. I actually wrote this in. I don't think I shared this with you, but I want to know what it's like, you know, your thoughts about, because what would you call yourself? What's your job title? And you don't have to say like who you work for or anything like that, but you know, what would you consider yourself like an executive or what, like a?
So I work for Microsoft. I have a job where I was a salesperson in technology for a number of years. And right now I have a team of people that basically my team's like responsible for like the contracting for corporate sales customers. So think of it as like almost like a paralegal type of team where my team helps put together the quotes and the paperwork and all that kind of stuff and helps do the negotiations with customers and then execute the deals so that they get processed compliantly. You know, we're a big publicly traded company. So it's kind of like being a sales lawyer type team, even though I don't have a law degree. I have a philosophy degree. I don't have a technology background. I just have had a computer since I was like 3 or 4. So I've just kind of grown up with the internet and computers and learned that way. But that's, you know, my job is definitely more on the you know, it's a corporate sales type of job. You know, I'm sitting in front of computers and you know, traveling occasionally. I travel less now with my current gig because most of my folks are here in Fargo, which is nice. But I used to travel around quite a bit. it's where a lot of my jujitsu travel that I used to do. I used to be able to
Right.
just piggyback on my work trips, which is kind of nice. But
anyway, it's fair to say you're a manager at probably one of the most successful global companies, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
big deal. So what are your thoughts about you knowing jujitsu and that? And what I think about this and what kind of spurred this is so Jake used to come to my noon classes all the time, and we talked about him, and he's actually the guy who took over for me when I moved on, and I worked a day shift now. And great coach, great guy. I love having him around. And I think he texted me one day, this is years ago. He's like, man, I'm out in the supermarket right now and I'm walking around and I'm just looking around at all these guys and I'm like, man, I could choke every one of these mofos out. Right. And just like, not necessarily that you would, but just that level of confidence that it gives you. I think about it, somebody in your world like that, where you got to have a lot of egos, you got to have a lot of people who think they're a big deal. But at the same time, like you have a team, you have people to protect, where maybe if you lacked confidence in those situations, it would make your job a lot harder. But, where you always have that jujitsu in your back pocket and you're like, man, this isn't going to come to blows, but if it came to blows, you know what? I'm going to triangle choke you.
Yeah. So I got to tell you, man, when people say like jujitsu, like, jujitsu changed my life, and it's like a meme of like some dude with like 2 stripes on his white belt, and he has like jujitsu tattooed on his knuckles. He's like, oh, jujitsu changed my life. Like it's kind of become this ridiculous meme, but I am totally serious that like me before jujitsu and me, like I've looked at pictures, like I've done like a side by side comparison of like, here's what I look like before I started jujitsu, here's what I look like now, and it's really surreal for me, like just like how much more confident and physically capable I am, but like how much calmer I am, especially in very stressful situations. So like, I haven't gotten into a physical altercation outside of jujitsu since I was like, I don't know, 15 or 16. Like I used to get in fights. I lived in a very small town. I was a nerdy kid who got picked on a lot, and I also was ready to fight. I didn't know how to fight, but I was down. And
Right.
so I ended up getting into a lot of fights because I invited arguments. I was, very quick-witted, quick-tongued. Like, I was just chirping at people, and sometimes there would be fights. But that hasn't happened since I was, a teenager. When it comes to my job, I am dealing with conflict and tension all day. That's my job, is dealing
Yeah.
with challenging situations, challenging negotiations, managing personalities, both the people on my team, how those people are interacting with other people. It's a lot of conflict mediation, you know, trying to stay like mentally motivated enough to work through a lot of really challenging situations where it's super, like if I zoom out and look at it, I go, oh, this is terrifying. Oh, I got everything. It's like, oh man, I'm gonna freak out, and jujitsu completely changed my outlook on life, and my career actually took off when I started jujitsu, where I had been doing okay, and I had started working for Microsoft in it's been 2000, like fall of 2012. I'd been working there for a couple of years as a contractor, and I was doing okay, and like things were like going well, and like my career really took off when I, like, right around the same time, like almost to the month. Like when I started jujitsu, like I ended up meeting one of my mentors very shortly afterwards, just through happenstance, and that just the progress and stuff that I was able to make at the same time, I think is directly related. I don't think it was a coincidence. I think it was like the timing of the start was there, but I think just like how much confidence it's given me in, yeah, like those things where like when I'm walking around places, like I don't have that, like I'm not physically intimidated by people in the same way that I used to be. Where I used to
Right.
like, I used to see more people, and I like, it was more like fake confidence. You know what I mean? Like, especially like, I'm not I don't invite a whole lot of controversy, but if you see somebody around, you're like, oh, that guy's, oh, I think I could kick my ass. I better be nice. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
I used to think like that, and when I started training, it started to go away. And when I started to get better, then it was like almost non-existent. And even just like in situations where like traveling around. A lot of times I'm by myself, and I'd go walking in a strange city, and I'd go like pretend I was Anthony Bourdain and go like check out restaurants and stuff by myself. And things were like, why were you walking around New Orleans by yourself? I'm like, because I wanted to go see this. I want to go see that. I'm like, oh, weren't you scared? And I was like, no. Like, I train jujitsu, like I get my ass kicked on a regular basis. Like I'm not as worried about that. And it's you have to be smart. You don't want to invite controversy. You don't want to be that guy who's like, the affliction bro. Like, hey man, I've done 6 months jujitsu. Don't mess with me. You know what I mean? Like, right. I'm not that guy. I'm sure that there are people out there that are like that, but for me, it definitely comes down to the confidence side. And the type of work that I do, and trying to keep a good head on your shoulders in really stressful situations. I mean, I encounter way more stress at jujitsu class than I do in my day. And so it's like, it makes everything else so much easier, man. Like I've done, there were times when you and I would do on a Friday night, we would do 6 6s in a row. And for anybody that's out there, if you haven't done 6 6s with Matt trying to do competition rounds, like, it's not a good time. It's like, okay, I'm going to do everything I can to like have this be good work for you, but I'm going to get smoked and try to like just last. Like, hey man, like I'll like keep fighting the whole time. And I was talking about that restaurant thing. I'm like, you and I are training. You've got quite a bit of weight on me and quite a bit of experience on me at the same time. But I also want to make sure that when you and I train, that you're getting good, like that I'm giving you a good fight. You know what I mean? Like, I want it to be reps for you so that you want to train with me. You know what I mean? And like, so that comes with some pressure of like, hey man, you can't, like, there's 4 more rounds. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. And getting to the point where I can go roll 6 6s with you, and then look around the room and say, all right, does anybody else want to train? Because if Matt's going to leave, I got a couple more in me. Like that kind of confidence that's cool. It makes everything else so much easier in life, because it's like, man, you get through that. Like, yeah, man, like somebody forgets your order, like at a restaurant or something like that. Like, man, you're never going to see me get upset about that. Like,
it's like whatever.
Doesn't matter.
Right.
Doesn't.
Man, going back to that guy if you are a 2-stripe white belt and you're thinking about getting jiu-jitsu tats on your knuckles, don't do that. Don't do that. I was at the mall. We went down to the Mall of America for Thanksgiving, right? And my wife's like, hey, I went down with my parents, and my mom wants to do Black Friday shopping, and I'm like, nah, I'm good. But I would like a new pair of these Nikes, and they have a Nike store there, right? And so I ended up going out later to get them. It wasn't early in the morning or anything. It was just a normal day. And of course, there's no discount or anything. Like Nike's like, whatever, you'll buy our shoes, and you'll like it. You'll pay full price and you'll like it, right? Well, this guy, he starts talking to me, and he's got a big neck. He's broad shoulders and all this stuff. And he goes, he notices my ears, and he goes, you a wrestler? And I go, no, jiu-jitsu. And he goes, yeah, me too, man. And he shows me his knuckles, says jiu-jitsu. I go, oh, where do you train? He goes, nah, I don't train anymore. Got my blue belt and I quit. And I'm like, man, what a terrible story. Because every time somebody's going to ask you about that tattoo, and you got to tell them that terrible story about how you got your blue belt, and now you're that dude who,
He's that blue belt meme where it's like, oh, you got your blue belt, and he like flashes the deuces and then just disappears.
The guy clicked his fingers, man. Probably one of my favorite like blue belt jokes of all time is the one where, hey, I know that you quit as a blue belt, but we got you on as a pallbearer for Professor's funeral, so you can let him down one more time, after he dies. Something like that. It was like, oh man, yeah. Don't be that guy either who gets your blue belt and then quits. It's hard though, right? It's hard. So we went over the second question a little bit. Your experience, your first experiences on the mat, but how has jiu-jitsu changed your life? And you went through that a little bit, and I think that too, man. I heard this quote, and I don't get into these like philosophical quotes too much, but I heard this and I really liked it. Is the guy said, the way jiu-jitsu changed my life is it's now the lens through which I view the world, right? And I think about that so much, where I think about like, I think Henry Gracie said this one time, where he came home one time and this is a guy who grew up in a jiu-jitsu gym, right? And he's great. He's one of the few guys where, everybody has a jiu-jitsu, how to tie your jiu-jitsu belt tutorial. Well, he has one, and it's like 14 minutes long. He had me for every single minute.
Yeah,
like,
I know
man,
exactly
what else
which one you're talking about.
How to tie your pants? 15 minutes? Let's go. I love it, man. And
he's got the energy.
He's got the energy, man. He's got that personality, right? And he's like, yeah. So his wife calls and she's like, hey, the sink's broken. It's flooding the sink. I don't know what to do. And he's like, hey, don't worry about that. And he's like, on the car on the way home, he's like, man, I'm going to go home and I'm going to jiu-jitsu that sink. So he's going to work through the problems. So maybe the first thing he tries, like you're in closed guard and you go for that arm bar, right? And it doesn't work. I was like, all right, I'm not going to get frazzled here. I'm just going to go for the next thing. I'm going to shoot for that triangle. So now I'm going to try this other thing. And man, I use that all the time where it's like, all right, I'm going to go jiu-jitsu this thing at work. Or, I'm going to, hey, we're going, I'm planning my week. I'm planning my day. All right, I'm going to jiu-jitsu this thing. And like that has probably been the biggest thing for me, stuff we've already talked about, where it's the mental toughness, it's the confidence. It's apparently dinner's done here. Man, doing podcasts out of your house, bro. That's how it goes.
These are the times we live in.
Everybody's home. #quarantine. So the mental toughness, right? Just having that confidence, and then just knowing that, like, man, if things don't go the way that you want them to right away, it's okay, right? Because it can still work out. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? And jiu-jitsu's taught me those things, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think, like, sometimes when people think confidence, they think like this brash, like, oh, I'm going to do what I say and I'm going to let you know what I do. Like, there's like this weird, it's like sometimes people mistake confidence for arrogance. And when I try to explain confidence to people, it's not an attitude thing. It's an experience thing.
Yeah.
And when you've done the work, you can be confident.
Right.
If you have not done the work, you have to fake confidence, and that rarely works. Like when I explain this at work a lot, I end up doing a lot of public speaking and doing presentations and trainings and stuff like that for organizations. And people ask me like, hey, how do you do that? Like, you seem like you're very comfortable up there. And I'm like, yeah, I am pretty comfortable. It's because I've done it a lot. And
right.
it doesn't necessarily mean I'm not nervous, but I'm very prepared. I've like, and even when something is like impromptu, the experience of doing all those other things allows me to be confident in another situation because I've earned that experience. And if you've earned experience, it's easy to be confident. It's the same thing. Like if you've done a lot of training and somebody goes, hey, you want to roll? Like, are you going to be nervous? No, you're probably like, sure. I know how to roll. I've been training for a really long
Maybe
time.
like tentative because you don't know how it's going to go. But, like, no, I mean, what's the worst thing that will happen? Like, you'll tap me. All right. And then we'll just roll again. Like, I mean, yeah, there's certainly those guys out there who are going to beat you up. But just like, yeah, man, like I've been beat up before. Like, let's go. Right.
Right. Same thing. And it's like, and confidence is directly linked to preparation. And if you put in the time and you put in the energy and you've prepared for something, then it's easy to be confident. And the mental side too, I think is the dealing with anxiety and those kinds of things. That's definitely a factor in varying degrees for other people, myself included. But if you can lean on that preparation, it makes it a lot easier for you to get through some of those other more anxious moments or tense moments, things like that, where you can still acknowledge that they're there, but the preparation is what, for me, that's where the seed of that confidence grows.
Man, I think like Chris D'Elia-esque, what you should do is so when I broke my hand, it's probably been like 4 years ago now.
Yeah.
I had to go in and tell my boss so it's like there's a command structure there, right? So the two guys at the top, I had to explain to them how I broke my hand. And I was like, oh yeah, so there's like this space with a mat, and then me and a bunch of other guys, we dress up in our pajamas and we try to beat each other up. And so I was trying to put my hand out to stop from getting beat up, and I broke it. And the second in command, he looks at me and goes, well, what you need to do is you need to quit wrestling other dudes in their pajamas. That's what you need to do. And I was like, yeah, man, that's really good advice. Thank you. I appreciate that. Awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and not do that because it's awesome. But I think with you, for where they're like, well, how are you so confident? I feel like you should pull them in and be like, you have no idea the kind of confidence you get from wrestling other dudes in their pajamas, and then just walk away.
Just walk away. Well, because there's been times because like my team is very social. Like they all they like to do happy hours and get-togethers and stuff like that. And when I first started working with them, they're like, "Oh, hey Rob, do you want to come do this thing?" I'm like, "No, I gotta go strangle some college kids." And they're like, "What?" I'm like, I'm not kidding. That's what I'm gonna go do now. It's like I'm gonna go take out my frustrations of working with all you guys on somebody else. And they're like,
Right.
"Oh, okay." And I was like,
Yeah.
kind of joking. I'm like, "No, I'm serious. Like that's like because it's a running thing. Like nobody knows what jujitsu is for the most part.
Right.
Like everybody goes, "Oh, it's gonna go do the jujitsu," and they hit you with the karate hands. But
Right.
like I get asked like by my coworkers or people that they just know me like at a very very high level, and they're like, "Oh, so you do the taekwondo?" And I'm like, "Nope, close, nope."
Yeah, not even close. No.
It's like jujitsu. They're like, "Yeah, okay." And they're like, "Oh yeah, I did that," and like everybody equates it. They're like, "Oh yeah, my 14-year-old got her black belt in taekwondo." I was like, "Oh, that's cool. Like, good for her."
Yeah.
Like, it's like
we had this guy start with us. He was a new officer, and same kind of thing, right? He's like this. He's a little guy, right? He's a little wispy boy. You probably know him, but but he's talking me up, man. I'm asking him, talking to him. He's like, "Oh yeah, I do martial arts too. I do Taekwondo." I was like, "Oh yeah, what rank are you?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm like the 14th level grandmaster. I have my own school." And I was like, "Oh dang, you got your own school?" He's like, "Yeah, I got my own school. I'm affiliated with this organization. Blah 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 blah. I've been to Korea. All this nonsense." And I was like, "All right, man. Here's the deal. Gas station downtown, right?" And I said, "Here's what's gonna happen. Is I have to know this. I can't move past until I know." I said, you're gonna stand over there about 10 feet away from me, and I'm just gonna come at you. And whatever your first move is, I want you to throw it like 100% at me, because I got to know what your first move is. If like that's what you spent your life doing, I know what my first move is. I'm not gonna tell you either, and we're just gonna go." And he's like, "Oh, okay, we'll do that." No confidence. He has no confidence in this, and he's probably like freaked out by me, right?
Yeah.
And so I start walking at him, not like a crazy pace, but just kind of walking at like a normal pace with purpose, right? And I probably got like that uncomfortable range, like that 3 feet away from him, and I just see him kind of like lock up and freeze, and I grabbed him, and I was like, "Man, that's your first move? Because now that I have a hold of you, you're screwed, bro. Like, this is what I do. Like, I just needed to get a hold of you, and we're going to end up on the ground at some point, and then things are going to get really crazy."
Oh my
right?
God. It would have been amazing to watch this happen. Of you just getting up close to him, like, "Why did you let me grab you?"
So one of my coworkers calls me, and she's like, "What's happening at the gas station?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "I just saw you walk at he's a new guy, he's a recruit. I just saw you walk at your recruit and just grab him." And I was like, "Oh yeah. We were trying to figure out like our first moves, and I was trying to see what his first move was, and it didn't go well for him, So I kind of hope after that experience, he's like questioned what he'd been doing for, the last 5 years of his life that it took him to get 14 level grandmaster.
Right.
But
I think especially, I think having you in the coaching program, obviously you have a network of folks. When you have people that are joining law enforcement, they're interested in law enforcement. We have several guys at our gym now that are coming in and training various, we've got folks in corrections, we've got folks in the sheriff's department, we've got other, folks in the PD. When you have guys that are coming in for, especially with the lens of, hey, I'm in law enforcement, I want to learn jujitsu to help supplement my career. Like, with your experience, what do you like? Do you treat them any differently than another student? Like, do you give them specific things to focus on, or talk to them about other things, like what's going to be most important for them joining law enforcement with your background? Or is it just like, no, just come in and do jujitsu? Like, how does it work for you?
Just come in and do jujitsu. Because again, I think it's It's that acclimation to violence, and it's learning how to control somebody else, right? And so I've never really gotten into anything specific jujitsu for law enforcement. I do jujitsu that I like to do, and the jujitsu I like to do uh, just happens to be sport jujitsu, right? We're gonna have to close this out. My phone's dying. But it just happens to be sport jujitsu. But I can easily equate that to controlling somebody.
Sure.
And, yeah, okay, I'm not going for a cross collar choke on them, but I can control them from mount. And that's one of the first classes we learn, how to maintain mount, right? Or using, I don't use a Kimura as a submission. I use it as a control point, right? So the Kimura trap system, it's what we learn in the intermediate class that I teach, right? That I teach those students, but I use that to control people. So yeah, I'm not going to come in and say, do these specific things for law enforcement. Right. Just come and do jujitsu, have fun, and it easily translates to the profession.
Have you had the opportunity to do a jiu-jitsu move on someone in real life?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so good. That's like, is it like, have you ever felt yourself going like, okay, this isn't a super serious situation, but you're just like, hey, I've got this guy, I've got a guy in a Kimura outside of a jiu-jitsu gym, and you have this is like, oh, that's interesting. Like, has that ever happened to you where you're like, you're just like, oh, that's kind of funny.
Yeah. It's surreal how, I think a lot of times we get caught up in the fact that it's so hard to do jiu-jitsu against other people who know jiu-jitsu, but I talk about this a lot where, most of the people don't know jiu-jitsu, and so it's that surreal experience where if you've ever experienced it in the gym, it's pretty cool. But, chances are you probably haven't, is where you watch somebody else is watching you do jiu-jitsu to them because they have no idea what's going on. They're like, oh man, this is pretty cool. What's he doing to my knee? Tap, tap, tap. Where like, that's what it's like out there, where it's a lot of times, you get somebody in something, they have no idea what's going on. And, it's cool. It is cool. I'll say it. Absolutely.
Jiu-jitsu is one of the superpowers that you can actually go get.
Yeah. All right, man. Are we going to call it?
Yeah. You got to go.
Episode 1.
Got to go eat your dinner. Got Not Your Rest Round, episode number 1. We'll be uploading this up to various platforms. Again, thank you for all these supports. Keep sending in your questions, and we appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, man. Like, subscribe, and any comments, questions, put them in the comments below, right?
Let's do it.
Do it.
All right.
All right.
Bye, guys.